Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you for having me. First, let me tell you something about me, as you have already alluded to. I did my medical studies in India. I did my residency in internship in Scotland. I came here to do my residency and fellowship. I practiced in the state of Texas for over 30 years. While I was in the mid 40s, I noticed that I was gaining weight in the winter time to lose it in spring and summer. So I thought, well, because I was not active in the winter time, I was gaining, that's natural. By the time I reached 50s, I found that the weight I gained in winter is not going away. And every year I was adding 1 or 2 pounds. Then I found out that is the same with almost everybody. As they get older, they put on 1 or 2 pounds each year, and it keep accumulating. And pretty soon you are considered obese, diabetic, and heart problems and all that. So I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to find out, why am I gaining weight? I was I was eating the same amount, I was exercising as before, yet I'm gaining weight. There has to be a reason. So I wanted to start from the beginning. And the beginning is, if you don't eat, you cannot gain weight. That's the truth. So what makes you want to eat? You cannot predict when are you going to eat, the time you are going to be hungry. You cannot predict how much will it take to quench your, or to satisfy you or make you feel full. But medical textbooks could not tell me why each person feels the sensation of hunger at different times. What is it that makes your brain feel that you need food? So I have to come up with my own research, my own uh, information, and then that is the first book I published, called Eat, Chew, Live, because the the title Eat, that means, and chew, the chew is very important. If we can think in nature, can you think of any food that adult humans can get nutrients from without chewing? Though, but we are ignoring that fundamental aspect of eating. With the foods, they are so soft, it barely touches your tongue before it is gone. Once you swallow it, you cannot enjoy it. So in order to live, you have to have foods that the body can adjust and help you with to get all the nutrients. Then, when I was in practice, I had a patient one day. He was usually a very jovial person, but on that day, he was so distraught. I asked him why. And he said, as we were speaking, his secretary was getting her leg amputated. So I asked him, oh, was she in an accident? And he said, no, she was a diabetic. And she was taking insulin. She kept her A1C below 7 all these years. Still, she's having her leg amputated. And I thought that he was a little bit more tense and distraught than the circumstances. Yes, his secretary was in trouble with having leg amputated. He's naturally very distraught. So I waited. And then he told me his story, that he was himself a diabetic on 2 different oral medications. But on that particular day, his doctor had told him he should start insulin. Then he thought of his secretary, who is already on insulin and having her leg amputated. And he thought to himself, I have 2 boys in high school. I have a business to run. How am I going to do that with no legs? So that is when I told him about my ideas about type 2 diabetes. And I asked him to come with me to the restaurant because it was lunchtime. I called my wife. Usually I go home for lunch. I told her I'm not coming today because I have to show this gentleman how to eat, because in the top of my book, the banner says, how you eat is more important than what you eat. So I took him to the restaurant. We had a meal, and I did not see him for over a year. When he came back, he was free of all his diabetic medications.
Very good.
Later on, about 12 years ago, well, that is at that time, this is the basis for writing my book, Diabetes, the Real Cause and the Right Cure. So I will explain more of that after I finish my introduction of the books, and then I will go back to this one.
That's exactly how I like to do that. We'll introduce the books and then we'll come in and we'll talk about each aspect of the book and we'll probe the conditions and circumstances that people need to know about and understand regarding your study and research.
Okay. So about 12 years ago, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I asked my doctor, why did it happen? He said, improper diet and lack of exercise. I was completely in shock, and I was afraid. How am I going to? How long am I going to live? What is going to happen to my family? All those things? Then I thought, well, I need to be an active participant in whatever is going to happen. First, to help the doctor to use less medication so I don't have as much side effects. Second, if I survive, what does that mean? When you say cancer survivor, that is not because the doctor can guarantee that you don't have any more cancer cells in your body. What that means is the available tests will not detect a cancer cell. In other words, you can still have cancer cell in your body hiding. So the question is how to prevent them from growing again. And that is the research I did that ended up with surviving cancer. Now, one day I was giving a talk to a group of oncologists and in a cancer hospital. So one of the doctors stood up and asked, Dr. John, the average age of an adult with cancer is 60 because you need accumulation of mutations of 6 decades before you have a cancer. Whereas the average age of a child with cancer is 6. So how is that possible? Why should a child develop cancer? He has not lived long enough to accumulate mutations. That started me thinking there has to be a different mechanism for a cancer to occur in a child. So what is cancer? Cancer is uncontrolled multiplication of a cell. It is a normal cell or a cancerous cell, it divides. So how can you understand uncontrolled multiplication? The best way to understand is controlled multiplication. If you get a wound, if you get a cut on the skin grows, new cells grow from both sides of the cut, and when they meet in the middle, they stop. What if they cannot stop? You have uncontrolled multiplication. So in order to understand why the cancer cells don't stop, you need to understand why normal cells stop when they finish their multiplication. So better way to understand is every one of us is a product of multiplication of one single cell, a zygote, which is formed after the ovum was fertilized, one single cell. And that fertilization happens not in the womb, but in the fallopian tube through which the ovum was coming to be implanted. So now, after the fertilization, there is one cell called zygote. It takes 5 to 6 days of journey before that zygote reaches the womb to be implanted. Do you know how many cells are there in the zygote at that time? 200 cells.
Okay, 200, okay.
So think about it, one cell which is rolling down the tube, dividing, what prompted that cell to divide? What is the mechanism? And then it stops at when it is implanted. Then these 200 cells are separated. Each one becomes a stem cell for each organ and system in the body. It is so controlled, so precise. So something goes wrong with any one of those cells, and you have a potential cancer cell. This is what happens in a child. The stem cell with the capability to multiply, it is in the wrong place, or it is somehow incapacitated to stop. It continues its ability to keep on multiplying. So this is when I wrote the book, When Your Child Has Cancer. Just to understand the process, that itself gives you some comfort, because most of the time, when you are diagnosed with cancer, the fear is of the unknown, what is going to happen. And your mind start working. Oh, can this happen? Can that happen? And you are under stress. So the more you understand, the less stressed you are. And then you can contribute to your own well-being by being proactive. So those are the 4 books that I've done.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Dr. John. What we're going to do is just take a stop recording and come right back and re-engage. So, and we'll have a series of questions regarding each of the books, and then we'll talk more about the most important thing that we probably need to discuss is the fear that people engage when they've had a diagnosis. So hold on one second. We'll stop right here. Record again. So Dr. John, so I want to take a minute to discuss, I mean, you've written some powerful and very compelling books, and these books speak to the very core issues that typical people and patients endure and face. I mean, and you know, and you've covered some very drastic elements such as diabetes. Now, the health industry earns almost $394 million because of diabetes, and there are 34 million people with it in America, or somewhere thereabouts. It's a very tragic and the health conditions of people with diabetes. Now, your book is going to turn healthcare on its ear, because it will challenge the whole premise of diabetes. And you suggest that we can be diabetes free in 8 weeks. And then there's the whole issue of intolerant. What that means and how to put it in context, because it's a real challenge, I'm sure, for the healthcare industry. So if you could unpack these elements for us a little bit, so we could really get the consummate perspective about, insulin resistance and diabetes itself, and how we get to 8 weeks diabetes free.
Well, again, I thank you for asking that question, because I think it's very critical. So in order to understand diabetes, let's start from the beginning of that. What is diabetes? Diabetes is diagnosed based on one single laboratory finding, that is elevation of blood sugar. That's it. There's no confirmatory test. There is an arbitrary decision from what level onwards you are a pre-diabetic, after what level you are a diabetic. There's no confirmatory test, only one test, that is elevation of blood glucose. Now, the diabetes is divided into 2, type 1 and type 2. What is the difference? The difference is absence or presence of insulin. In type 1, which usually happens in children, they don't produce insulin from their pancreas, their own pancreas. Whereas in type 2, insulin is present. So in order to understand diabetes, you need to know, what does insulin do? Now, if you're in a home or an apartment, if you hear the doorbell ringing, then you know there is somebody outside. You have the option of opening the door or not. That's entirely up to you, but at least you know. every cell in the body, we have 32 trillion of them, can use glucose to produce energy. However, when glucose is outside the cell, the glucose molecule has no way of letting the cell know it is outside. There is no doorbell for the glucose to ring. That is the job of insulin. Insulin is the one that informs the cell there is glucose outside. Then the nucleus of the cell sends a wagon, a transport module, to load up glucose molecules and bring them in to produce energy. Now you can imagine in children with type 1 diabetes, if there is no insulin, there's plenty of glucose outside, that blood sugar is high, but the cells are starving. And cells in the vital organs starve, they die. So the organs die and the cell. So these children used to die by the age of 10 before insulin was discovered. In 1921, when insulin was discovered, it was a lifesaver for children with type 1 diabetes. Injection of insulin improved their quality of life and increased their lifespan to almost normal. Now, the endocrinologist found some adults with elevated blood glucose level, and they thought at that time it is the same disease happening at a later age. They injected the adults with the insulin, and sure enough, their blood glucose level went down. They said, everybody should be happy. We can control this disease. What happens since then is somebody did a test when at that time there was no test available to measure the level of insulin in the blood. When that test became available, there was something very unexpected. That is, adults with type 2 diabetes, adults with high blood sugar had normal or sometimes even above normal levels of insulin in their blood. So how can you explain that? You have insulin, you have high glucose level. So the endocrinologist had to come up with an answer. And they said, it is very likely that cells in the body are not responding to insulin. In other words, what's called insulin resistance. Okay? And the funny part was, if every cell in the body is resistant to insulin, then the person cannot function. So they had to pick and choose which ones are resistant. So they decided on three types of cells: the muscle cells, the liver cells, and fat cells. Why? Why did they pick these three? And the body has 200 different types of cell. But they picked these three not because they found there was a test to identify resistance or measure resistance, but they could explain the laboratory findings more easily by picking these three. So if you look at the website of the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases of NIH, you will find the following quotation. That is, type 2 diabetes usually begins when muscle, liver, and fat cells do not use insulin well. This is the so-called insulin resistance theory. What I am suggesting is this has never been validated. Now, what does that mean? In every science, before a hypothesis is accepted, that has to go through a three-step validation process. The first is logic. Does it make sense? Does the hypothesis make sense? Now, out of 200 different types of cells in the body, why only these three decide one day? I'm not going to answer. It is like there are 200 apartments in the building, and 3 apartments for no known reason decide they will not answer the UPS driver anymore from tomorrow. We are not going to answer. They don't coordinate anything. It just so happens
Mhm.
these three people, just like that, three different types of cells in the body.
It's almost like they went on strike. Those three sectors went on strike and said, we'll take no more insulin. Only those three. That's interesting.
Yeah, they won't. And even then, not all functions of insulin only related to glucose.
Okay. That.
So it's
Wow.
very, very specific. Who is coordinating that? There is no coordination.
That's a good question. Your brain or your body or something has to make that decision that we're going to go on strike, and the muscles, the fat, and the cell system, liver will not take insulin. I mean, and they do it at the same time, probably. At the same instance, they do it probably.
And not only that, why did they pick on insulin? There are so many other hormones in the body.
Right. Okay.
And the same thing doesn't happen to any other hormone.
Okay.
So there is no logic to this insulin resistance hypothesis.
Okay. Okay.
The second thing is, for validation, you need a mechanism. If your doorbell is not working because something wrong with the receptor or the bell ring, then you can see, or the ringtone is not going through, or the bell. So where is the problem? Is the receptor on the cell wall not working, or the message is not getting to the nucleus, or the nucleus itself is damaged, or the wagon is defective? And is it the same defect in all these three sites?
So tell us, doctor, what do you think happened? What do you think happened?
No, well, this is what nobody knows. They have been trying to explain it, but nobody has yet found a reason or a mechanism.
I see.
The third have you ever heard of a test to measure the degree of insulin resistance?
Is that A1C?
No, A1C is the level of glucose.
Okay.
Not the level of resistance. There is no test.
No
How can you
test.
test something that does not exist?
Okay. I see.
If you are newly diagnosed, or if you had diabetes for 20 years, or if you had a complication, it doesn't matter. Nobody knows, is the complication because your resistance is getting worse or not, because there is no test for it. So this is the reason why I suggest that the concept of insulin resistance as the cause of type 2 diabetes has not been scientifically validated.
Wow.
Okay, so then, oops, sorry.
That's
I
amazing.
have a question.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Well, while her thing is coming through, tell me about A1C, because it seems that you have a challenge with the A1C test.
The A1C is an arbitrary number to show the amount of glucose that is circulating in your blood. Now, when you say blood sugar, we are measuring blood glucose. Okay? Many people confuse the term blood sugar with normal table sugar. Blood sugar is glucose, normal table sugar is a double molecule glucose plus fructose. They are not exactly the same. The fructose will be absorbed. Normal sugar can add to blood glucose. The first thing anybody diagnosed with type 2 diabetes does is stop eating table sugar. But that will not do anything as far as your diabetes is concerned. There is no evidence that stopping table sugar will make your diabetes any better, because the glucose, the source of your glucose in the blood is different from the table sugar that you're consuming. If that was the case, all you have to do is stop taking table sugar and your diabetes will go away. It is not going to happen. So that's a different reason. Glucose is a very active molecule. It gets attached to different proteins in the body. And one of the proteins it gets attached to is hemoglobin, that is in the red blood cell. The red blood cell lasts only 3 months. So every 3 months, new blood cells are being formed. It's a continuous process, but it is replaced every 3 months. So if you take the amount of glucose attached to the hemoglobin in the red blood cell, you can get a 3-month average of how high your blood glucose level was. That is the reason it's more consistent. So you can compare it from 1 3-month to another 3 months. That is what it is used for. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that answered my question. Wow. I mean, that in itself, it just announces more thorough. We're going to take a minute and stop recording. Now, Dr. John, I'm telling you, your explosive understanding of this puts things in the better context. And it helps us to explore the kind of reset that we need to look at for this incredible illness. I mean, when you talk about the explanation of, the measurement of not being a measurement for the level of insulin, why is that? Why don't we have a measurement that actually turns its ear on the aspect of what has caused the diabetic condition? You think it'd have to be there for that.
Well, that is the question we need to ask the endocrinologist. Right?
Yeah.
Mr. Ernstein, did he have a question?
Yes, we do. I'm pulling that up now. Audience, are there other questions out there that people have concerns for and questions about? Tell me.
I have a question, Dr. John.
Yes.
So a lot of the experts will say that the problem with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is insulin. You're
Right.
challenging that age-old myth and
Right.
saying that it's our lifestyles that need to change, our habits that need to change in
Right.
order for us to control diabetes. So
Right.
can you shed some light on why you're challenging the system? And then Donna Four has a question and Ernestine Wooten has a question.
Okay, so let me explain, let me answer your question first so that people can understand where I am coming from. There is, our muscles are like a hybrid engine. A hybrid engine in a car can use either gasoline or electricity to produce the energy. When you are starving, if you have not eaten all day, you can still function. You can run, you can play, there are professional athletes out there. They play during Ramadan, a Muslim holiday. They cannot eat anything during the daytime. And many of you, or some of us, sometimes you don't get to eat all day long, but you can still function. Where is the muscle producing the energy from? What fuel does it use? 80% of the energy on a day-to-day basis that we produce come from, not from glucose, but from fatty acid. In other words, if you have plenty of fatty acid available, the muscles can keep using fatty acid instead of glucose. Now, why did we have that facility? If you think about it, during evolution, there were periods of time when there was famine. You could not get enough food to eat, or the type of food available. If you think about Inuits in Alaska, they go whale hunting, they used to go up to 6 months at a time. And what they ate was blubber, that is fat and protein, no carbohydrate. So how did they survive not having any source of glucose? Their own liver produced glucose from amino acids from the protein. So in other words, human can survive without eating any complex carbohydrate directly, because there is carbohydrates in almost every vegetable or any food we eat, including mussels. There is carbohydrate in the form of glycogen. So that is what nature has programmed us to do. So imagine, if you will, there's plenty of fatty acid circulating in the blood. Then the muscles can use fatty acid to produce energy, leaving glucose in the blood. The glucose level goes up and you are diagnosed as a diabetic. So the question is, where is this fatty acid coming from? Why do we have excess fatty acid? To make you understand that fully, let me ask you this question. At the moment, we know 85% of type 2 diabetics in the United States are obese. Okay. Suppose you take 100 obese people or overweight people. How many of them
Will be
will
diabetic.
be type 2 diabetic?
I don't know.
You would expect majority of them should be,
Right.
but only less than 40% will be diabetic.
Oh, boy. Well, so
That
all,
means 60% are obese yet not diabetic.
wow.
So if obesity is the reason for type 2 diabetes, why are they not getting diabetes?
That's a good point. So all diabetics are not obese and
No.
all obese are not diabetic.
Right.
Interesting.
Then how do you explain the 15% who are not obese but diagnosed with diabetes?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Now, in India, 60% of type 2 diabetics are not obese.
Oh,
60%.
60%.
So the insulin resistance theory cannot explain all these things. And even more interesting is a young lady with no family history of diabetes, no previous history of diabetes, at the second trimester of gestation, after 8 weeks of pregnancy, is diagnosed with gestational diabetes.
Okay.
And then after delivery, within days, her blood sugar comes normal.
She's no
The
longer
diabetes goes
diabetic.
away.
Oh, wow.
So how can you have temporary insulin resistance?
That's very interesting. Very good questions. I mean, so temporary insulin, is there, I mean, is it suggested that they take insulin for temporary, resistance? Or
Well,
what?
let's go back and look at why, according to my theory that I was explaining to Elizabeth, how does this happen? So what I'm suggesting is if we have excess of fatty acid in the blood, the muscles can switch to burning fatty acid. I call it the fatty acid burn switch, leaving glucose. So what is the reason you have so much fatty acid in the blood? So you need, in order to find that, in order to understand that, we need to understand what does body do from excess food that you consume. After a meal, there's plenty of glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, and cholesterol absorbed from after digestion. The liver keeps only 120 grams of glucose. The rest will be converted into fatty acid, any excess. And the fatty acid, 3 molecules of fatty acid will be tied up with 1 molecule of glycerol. This is called triglyceride. That is the name of the fat that we store in our abdomen, in our buttocks, in our breast, and all that. So imagine, if you will, if your fat storage capacity is 15 or 20 pounds, and if you eat more food than what can be stored, what will happen to the fat and the fatty acid? The fat is called triglyceride. So if you look at the blood test, the lipid test that you have from your doctor, there will be a line for triglyceride. Nobody pays much attention to that. That triglyceride level will keep going up before you become a diabetic. That also means your fatty acid level is going up. So because there is no place to store it. So there is no diabetic gene. There is no type 2. You did not inherit. Right now, we say, oh, almost everybody has a family member or a relative who is diabetic, and the doctor will tell you, oh, it is in your gene. It is in your family. There's no diabetic gene. Otherwise, you should be diabetic from day 1 of your life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow.
That's true. That's true. But let me ask you a question.
Ms. Wooten had a question?
No, Donna.
Donna, you have a question?
Yeah, doctor, here's my question. So
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you're trying to do something, what you're describing is a big change of habits. And the psychology behind that, at least in my view, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is you need to enlist someone to be your mentor or to be your friend and kind of encourage you to stay on track, because oftentimes people will start on a diet or a change of habits, and then because they don't have anyone sort of guiding them or giving them some encouragement, they derail. They go to a party and they overeat. They go, okay, well, I've blown my diet, so I'm done. So do you encourage the use of someone to be there to assist people when they're trying to make this big a change?
Absolutely. Any help you can get. The primary help should be coming from within your own household. Because if you talk to people, no, remember the person who was my patient who I diagnosed, showed him how to eat and he lost weight. He brought his A1C below normal or normal. And then after a few years, he maintained it on his own. After a few years, I called him up to find out how he's doing. And what he's saying was, it is very hard when you are in business. You have to attend business meetings, you have to travel, your whole schedule is disturbed. And even more important is your family. They want to keep on eating the way they have been eating.
Sure.
So the fundamental thing is, where do you get the support from? Even if you get support from your friends, if your family is not with you, that is very difficult to maintain. So you have to convert your family first and make them your friends, because you have an objective. It is good for them also in the long term. But if they don't convert, then you are always struggling. I understand what you're saying. And that is a very valid question.
Dr. John, you propose
Thank you, doctor.
a tremendous change in process of your lifestyle. Well, maybe it depends on origin, experience, and condition. Because I mean, you propose some pretty unique adjustments in terms of eating, how we use food, and the long-term benefits to be, of course, diabetes-free and of course, cancer-free, and a healthy state of mind and spirit that way. Yeah, and your suggestion for family helping support, that's tremendous. Are there any other conditions? I mean, like going to the food or fresh markets, or going to
the question is, how do we implement this into your lifestyle? What is the best way to do it? I started earlier on, I asked the question, is there any food in nature that you can get nutrients from without chewing? And the answer is no, unless you take honey as a food. So you need to chew. Why do you have to chew? There are reasons why. For example, let me give you this example. If you are thirsty, can you predetermine the amount of water that will take to quench your thirst?
No.
Each time you're thirsty, the quantity required to quench the thirst is different. If you have been working out, you need more. If you have not been, you may take 1 or 2 sips. And now, look at it one step further. When you stop drinking, your thirst is quenched. But where is that water? That water is still in your stomach. It has not been absorbed yet. So how did your brain know you have consumed enough water to quench your thirst? How did the brain know that?
Wow.
My theory is very simple. As I explained in my book, Eat, Chew, Live,
Right.
I explained that in here. See, when you are drinking, your taste buds are detecting not only what you are drinking, whether it is coffee or water or wine or whatever, but also metering how much is going down. The brain already knows what your deficit is. And when the intake matches the deficit, your thirst is quenched. There is a similar mechanism for solid nutrients also. When you chew, these nutrients are released at a rate where the taste buds can pick them up, monitor them, and meter them. Now, what happens is, well, let me go back. Is there any evidence for that? Between the 2 world wars, we have been talking about war and fighting. Between First World War and Second World War, Dr. Clara Davis asked the question, do we have a normal natural mechanism to regulate food intake? She took 15 orphan children who have never been exposed to solid food. They
Mhm.
only had breast milk.
Mhm.
She brought them into a hospital and she prepared 30 different foods in a very natural way
Mhm.
and then provided these in small portions on a tray. And these were toddlers. And the toddler has to pick and choose what he or she wanted to eat. Then only the nurse will feed the child.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
These children were malnourished. Many of them had rickets. One had very severe rickets with bone deformity.
Mhm.
And Dr. Davis put a cup of cod liver oil on the tray
Mhm.
because that's a good source of vitamin D that Jerry talked about early.
Mhm.
And the child voluntarily drank the cod liver oil until the bone healed. After
Wow.
that, he never touched it.
Really? Really?
So just imagine for the child's brain to
No.
identify this is the source of the nutrient the body is
That's
lacking
amazing. Yeah, that's
and
amazing.
how much to take
Mhm.
and when to stop.
Right, right, right. That's
That's a
amazing.
very powerful knowledge that
It
we all
is.
have.
That's amazing.
If you observe toddlers, you will see three things. One, they will eat only when they are hungry.
Okay. Okay.
Second, they eat what they enjoy.
Mhm. Mhm.
Third, they will stop eating when they
Mhm.
are
Would have
when
had
they
enough.
don't enjoy it anymore. You
Right,
cannot
right,
force them to eat anymore.
right, right, right. That's amazing.
So
Wow.
I asked 10 overweight adults
Mhm.
to write down when they felt hungry for 3 days in a row and what time they ate.
Mhm.
4 out of 10 never felt hungry for 3 days.
Really?
But
Okay.
that did not stop them from eating.
No, I didn't. They ate out of habit, not out of hunger. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. See that.
So I
So,
asked them, why did you eat? He said, oh, it was time to eat.
right, right, right. Wow. That's
So that
phenomenal.
is what we have to change. And the type of food you eat,
Uh,
what food, if you don't put it in your mouth, it cannot be absorbed into the blood as glucose.
that's right. That's right.
And the
Wow.
biggest source of glucose in the modern day diet comes from grains
Brains.
and
Okay.
grain-based foods.
Mhm.
If you can cut that down to 1/2 of what you're eating right now
Wow.
and try it for 2 months,
Mhm.
you will see a big difference.
Wow. Dr. John, I tell you, I mean, I know I went way over time, but your suggestions and the offerings that you provided for us gives us tremendous insights on how we could reconstruct our thinking, our lifestyles, and our habits so that we can attain a better state of health that way. And so I'm so every time we sit down with you, you tell us something new and different. And also you give us a great level of confidence because we're not so fearful about what we may have to endure or face because you've offered some tremendous solutions to help us understand. I mean, and the questions that you posed, wow, I mean, these are questions that deserve answers. And I'm sure you're doing your research to discover what those could possibly be. Everybody on deck, Dr. John, and I understand he's got a new book coming out. And so we're excited, and we're really on bated breath about what to uncover with our understanding. You want to give us a glimpse if you can?
I want to finally just to tell each person, you have to be in charge of your own health.
Yeah.
Don't give it to a medication. Don't give it to somebody else.
Right.
You have to be in charge. And the simple thing is eat what most of the foods that you eat should be something that you can chew.
Sure.
And everybody enjoys eating. But my advice will be enjoy what you eat.
Sure.
Take time to enjoy.
That's good. That's good advice. So please, everybody, give Dr. John a round of applause for his contributions and help here. We appreciate you, Doctor. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, we have to come bring things to a conclusion today.
Miss
You have another
Wharton, Miss Wharton had a question. Do you want me
Ms.
to?
Wooten, do you have a question? No, I think, no, I think she's okay. She's
Okay.
Very good. So,
Oh, I raised my hand in support of what you were saying
okay.
and appreciated what you were saying. And thank you so much for your information. It is quite enlightening and helpful. So thank you. It was just a hand of praise and a raised hand of thanks.
Right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank
for
you.
your- So now that means we're all on board now to get our thinking right about what we're eating, how we're processing our food, and how we're the acquisition process, and so the sourcing. So I want to thank you all today for being on board with this call. We've got some great conference meetings coming up, and we encourage you to stay tuned. They're going to be outstanding. But our guest list today was so incredible. We had some very powerful speakers, and I learned a lot today. I learned a lot. I never knew that I could doodle my way to health. I never knew that. That's amazing. And everybody brought such enlightening information. And so we're encouraged and excited about tomorrow. And Colonel James and his battle sense, and I thank him for his service and duty. And Colonel, also Colonel DeFore, thank you, Donna, for being here with us. And Reginald, thank you also for being a part of our effort. And Jerry, I think he's gone, but thank all of our guests for being a part. And so with that, we're gonna have to say so long until the next broadcast. Of course, this will be broadcast on demand, so you can look at it when you please. And we're excited about where we're going with this in terms of health. My prayer is that everybody will endure a greater state of health in the upcoming year. And if you don't know how to do it, ask questions. You need to get your power, as Dr. John is saying. Get your power, because it's on you to decide what you'll put in your mouth. It's on you. And you need to eat healthy, to live healthy, to enjoy your life. And also, you should also enjoy all the food that you eat, and it also should taste good. Okay, with that being said, thank you so much for everybody and your participation. And we pray that we come to a peaceful, more healthier, and incredibly wonderful state of mind. All right, all said, all praise, thank God. Thank you all. And we look to you till we see you the next time. All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.